Only one clue remained, a message written in ink on the back wall of his room. It said, "The spiral opens again." It was an old man in Tanjung Bira who first mentioned the numbers. He was a retired lighthouse keeper named Pak Ralph, living in a weathered stilt house at the edge of the cape. He had kept mostly to himself for years, but after reading about Armin's disappearance in a folded newspaper, he walked unannounced into a local police station with a yellowing notebook wrapped in oilcloth. "I saw the same thing," he said. "Back in '78. The officers, half amused and half curious, opened the notebook. Inside were hand-drawn tide logs, weather entries, and a line of repeated digits. -5.2361, 118.9233. Coordinates. "I used to mark sea distortions there," he said. "Every few years. Always at night. Always after strange lights. But no one ever cared until now." Those numbers pointed to a deep channel just south of Central Island. A location marked by no shipping lane, no buoy, no warning. A dead zone. And now, with fresh electromagnetic readings still pulsing quietly from that region, someone had started paying attention. One of the men paying attention was Dr. Salim Haroon, a geophysicist at a small private university in Surabaya. After seeing overlapping patterns in magnetic anomalies from Masalembo and past events in the Pacific, he reached out to the maritime authorities with a request. Permission to survey. He got no reply. So he chartered a civilian research vessel himself. The Samudra Raya set out quietly 1 week later, posing as a coral study mission. Dr. Haroon brought with him a small team, a sensor technician, an oceanographer, and a linguist named Mira Fadilla, who had joined the expedition for reasons no one fully understood. On the third day at sea, they crossed the invisible border into the zone marked by the old lighthouse keeper's coordinates. The first thing they noticed was the air. Thick. Heavy. As if the ocean was exhaling something dense and unseen. Dr. Haroon deployed a magnetometer array into the depths. At 110 meters, it began to twitch erratically. By 125 meters, the reading spiked off scale. No visible source. No underwater cables. Just energy. And then the sound returned. Through the ship's steel hull, through every sensor and speaker, the hum leaked in, low, harmonic, rhythmic. Mira stood perfectly still on the deck, her eyes wide. She whispered a word none of them expected. A language. The team gathered around her. "What do you mean?" asked Haroon. "It's not a sound," as she said. "It's layered. Repetitive. Like syntax. It's speaking in cycles." She pulled a small recorder from her bag and began to translate, syllables shaped not by meaning but by frequency, almost as if the ocean itself had become a transmitter. That night, she barely slept. Her notebook filled with what looked like glyphs. Geometric loops. But in every sketch, there was one unchanging symbol at the center, a spiral. On the fourth day, the hum intensified. The sea beneath them seemed to flex, not crash, not wave, but pulse. Instruments stopped registering depth. The sonar displayed static. The compass spun wildly before going still. Then, in the distance, they saw it. A black form rising above the surface. Not a creature. Not a vessel. Just a smooth, curved shape breaching the water in total silence, like a dome, slick with reflection, that held no texture. It hovered partially above the surface, motionless. Watching. Every member of the crew froze. And then, the hum cut out. The dome sank slowly back into the sea without a splash. The instruments blinked once and returned to normal. But something had changed. In the hours that followed, Myra's breathing grew shallow. She stopped speaking. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. When Haroon found her curled in the observation room, she had written a single phrase on the window using her fingertip. "It's not a place. It's a door." By morning, she was unresponsive. Her pulse was steady. But she wouldn't wake. The Samudra Raya turned back. When they reached land, the Coast Guard was already waiting for them. Their equipment was confiscated. Their logs deleted. The authorities claimed the area had experienced natural interference due to undersea gas pockets. But Dr. Haroon knew better. The spiral was no anomaly. It was a signal. One designed to summon. And someone had answered. Mira Fadila's condition remained a mystery. Upon returning to Surabaya, she was admitted to a private hospital under observation. Though her heart beat normally and her brain showed activity, she lay silent, eyes closed, muscles soft, skin pale as driftwood. But she was not asleep. Neurologists reviewed her scans. Unusual electrical activity surged through her temporal lobe in rhythmic bursts, patterns unlike any seizure, more like a code repeating itself across neural pathways. One specialist likened it to a metronome tapping at the soul. The doctors used their terms. But Dr. Salim Haroon, sitting beside Mira every day, simply whispered what he believed. She heard it. He wasn't the only one who suspected something deeper. That week, an envelope arrived at his apartment. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from a satellite surveillance pass in early 1999. It showed the waters around Central Island, and a faint, spiraling glow just beneath the surface. There was a note typed on old paper. They knew then. They know now. That place is not abandoned, it is quarantined. No agency claimed responsibility. No further message arrived. Meanwhile, Mira began to hum. At first, the nurses thought it was interference from the machines. But late one night, one of them leaned close and heard it clearly, low and vibrating from her throat, a sound like the ship's signal from the Masalembo crossing. She was humming the same harmonic loop that had nearly crashed the Samudra Raya's instruments. Dr. Haroon brought in an old reel recorder. He played the ship's original signal near her bed. She reacted. Her eyes fluttered but did not open. Her hand twitched. The hum changed pitch to match the playback exactly, like she was responding to it. He switched off the recorder. Her body stilled. Then her mouth moved. One word. Barely a whisper. Below. The doctors dismissed it as a reflex. But Haroon knew. He returned to the university, searching through maritime records, underwater scans, and foreign geological databases. What he found was not listed in any official Indonesian files, but buried in a declassified Dutch document from 1938. It spoke of an undersea formation near Central Island. Not coral. Not volcanic. A structure. Angular. Too precise to be natural. It was dismissed as a mapping error at the time, war was approaching, and no one cared about strange formations beneath forgotten seas. Haroon now believed that structure was not just still there, but active. And Mira in her silence had become its voice. In a final act of desperation, Haroon returned to Pak Rauf, the old lighthouse keeper, hoping to confirm the last known signs of the anomaly. The old man was waiting. He slid a weathered journal across the table. On the last page was a drawing done in trembling ink, an island in the center of black water, surrounded by a dozen concentric lines. Not waves. Not depth rings. Each circle was labeled with dates. 1952. 1953. 1954. 1955. 1956. 1957. All years tied to reported disappearances, electromagnetic anomalies, or strange sightings in the Masalembo region. But one final ring was drawn larger than the rest. And next to it, 2025. Now, Pak Rauf looked Haroon dead in the eyes. You think the spiral shows itself to those who find it? He said, voice brittle with age. No. It shows itself to those it chooses. Then what happens next? Haroon asked. The old man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his shirt, revealing a faded burn on his chest. The same shaped spiral, barely visible now. But it was there. Next, he finally said. Next, it opens. 2 weeks after Mira whispered her single word, below, she vanished. There was no break-in. No witness. Her room remained untouched except for the faint echo of a low hum that the night nurse claimed never stopped until sunrise. The security cameras caught only static during the missing hours. When they flickered back on, her bed was empty. Gone. Without trace. News of her disappearance never reached the public. Her records were sealed. But Dr. Salim Haroon received a second envelope. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No origin. Just a single audio file titled Glacier Zero. He listened. It wasn't a sound file in the traditional sense. Not music. Not speech. But a fusion, harmonics layered into infrasonic frequencies that shifted in repeating cycles. Haroon ran it through a spectrum analyzer. The waveform formed a pattern. And when he overlaid the peaks and valleys on a regional map of the Masalembo Basin, the points connected. A geometric shape. Perfectly symmetrical. The same shape Mira had been drawing before her collapse. And at the center of that formation, Central Island. But it wasn't the island that caught Haroon's attention, it was the ocean floor beneath it. He contacted a colleague in Jakarta who specialized in sub-bottom sonar imaging. Quietly, under the pretense of an offshore archaeological study, they acquired raw sonar sweeps taken over the past 5 decades. Most showed nothing. But a single 1983 survey, blurry and partially corrupted, revealed outlines deep beneath the sediment. Metallic geometry. Right angles. Chambers. A submerged structure almost a kilometer wide. Buried. Forgotten. Or protected. Haroon was no longer studying a phenomenon. He was uncovering a mechanism, something engineered. Something alive in its own way. Driven by urgency, he arranged for one final dive expedition. The team was small. Trusted. He called in an old acquaintance from his university days, Dr. Anindya Karim, a deep-sea engineer known for her work in submerged robotics and autonomous underwater vehicles. She brought Kasatmata, a submersible drone designed for abyssal navigation. Capable of reaching depths most human divers could never survive. They launched under the cover of a marine biology project. The paperwork claimed coral classification. But their true destination was far more precise, coordinates cross-referenced from Myra's translated signal and the sonar anomaly. The waters were calm. Too calm. As Kasatmata descended into the deep, the team monitored the feed from a temporary lab set up on a support vessel above. At first, the footage showed the expected: dark sediment, cold currents, occasional bursts of bioluminescent plankton. Then the landscape began to change. The seabed leveled. Flattened. Not natural. At 130 meters, Kasatmata passed over something clean. A surface of impossible smoothness. No algae. No coral. As though the ocean itself avoided it. The drone's lights revealed carvings, not words, not symbols, but layered patterns burned into the metal-like material. Spirals intersecting with rings. Grids that pulsed faintly when exposed to the drone's scanning beam. Then movement. Not from the sea. From the surface itself. The carvings shimmered. Not due to light, but as if reacting to presence. A pulse rippled across the platform. The team watched in stunned silence as Kasatmata's instruments registered a temperature increase. From 4 degrees to 15. The sea was warming. A hatch-like seam split open ahead of the drone. Silent. Without pressure. Is it responding to us? Anindya whispered. Haroon shook his head. No. Not to us. She stared at him. Then to what? The signal flared. A hum surged through the monitors. It wasn't interference. It was the same rhythm as Myra's voice. The same frequency embedded in the original Signer Lot recording. The platform beneath Kasatmata began to shift, retracting inward, revealing a tunnel. Beyond it, only black. The drone stopped transmitting. No sound. No data. Just silence. The sea above remained undisturbed. The ship floated in place. And deep below, something had opened. Something that had waited decades to be found. Or decades to be freed. At 4:17 a.m., the drone Kasatmata stopped responding. The support vessel's monitors went dark. No error. No mechanical alert. Just the absence of data, as though the signal had been swallowed whole. Dr. Haroon and Dr. Anindya stared at the black screen for 3 full minutes, neither willing to speak the truth aloud. Something had taken it. Or worse, something had turned it off. Anindya tried to reactivate the drone's beacon. Nothing. She rerouted power. Restarted the transmission relay. The system acknowledged the signal but returned no response. That was impossible unless the unit had been physically severed from the network. But the instruments had shown no crash. No impact. It was as if the drone had simply crossed a line and ceased to exist in this world. Haroon made the call to ascend. But they were not fast enough. As the winch reeled in the tether, the water began to shift. The current reversed direction. Not with violence, but with pressure. As if the ocean was drawing a breath. The sonar lit up. A single object, massive and symmetrical, was rising from the seabed, just below the ship's position. Its dimensions were impossible. Larger than a submarine. Not smooth, but patterned. Like a dome built of spiraling plates, each layer rotating counter to the one above and below. A structure in motion. Haroon's voice cracked as he read the depth indicators aloud. 130 meters. 120, 115. Anindya looked at him. It's coming up. They powered down the lights. Cut the engines. Floated in silence. Nothing broke the surface. Instead, the sonar showed the mass halting mid-rise, then separating. For symmetrical arms extending outward in perfect radial form. It wasn't approaching. It was opening. Inside the lab, the computers began to emit static. Then a signal, clear, piercing, and familiar. The spiral. The hum. But this time, it was layered with something else, something new. A voice. Human. Barely audible. Whispering in an endless loop. I see you. I see you. I see you. Anindya gripped the table. That's Myra's voice. That's her. Haroon felt a chill travel from his neck down to his spine. No. That's something using her voice. Then the lights flickered once. Twice. And then came the pressure. Every barometer on board spiked. The crew dropped to the deck, clutching their heads as a deep-frequency vibration passed through their skulls, not through their ears, but through bone and blood. A technician's nose bled. Another began sobbing uncontrollably. Outside, the sea turned glass-like. And then silence. Everything stopped. In the lab, the monitors slowly came back to life. One display blinked to reveal a still image. Kasatmata's final transmission. It showed a single frame. A tunnel dimly lit by ambient glow. Walls of reflective black etched with spirals. In the distance, barely visible, stood a figure. Humanoid. But wrong. Its proportions were off. Its posture was unnatural. Elongated arms hung motionless. Its head tilted upward as if listening to something far above. It stood facing the camera. Staring at the drone. Staring through it. And behind the figure, carved into the tunnel wall, a message in symbols now unmistakably familiar. Spiral. 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 And then, we were never gone. Anindya closed the monitor. Her hands trembled. We need to leave. Now. Haroon didn't argue. They abandoned the remainder of the mission. Left the drone. Left the sea. As the vessel pulled away, the sonar blinked one last time. The mass below retracted, sank quietly into the seabed. As if nothing had ever been there. 2 days later, Haroon received a final message. No sender. No trace. Just coordinates. And one sentence? The coordinates led to land. Specifically, a stretch of coastline near Probolinggo, East Java, far from Central Island, far from any known maritime anomaly. It was farmland bordered by cliffs and coconut groves. Quiet. Innocuous. Dr. Salim Haroon stared at the printed satellite image for hours. There was nothing obvious. No base. No seismic disruption. But the message was clear. The pattern had shifted. Whatever force lay buried beneath the Masalembo Triangle was no longer bound to the sea. It had found a new surface. He arrived at the location under heavy rain. The air felt wrong. Not cold. Not humid. Just thick. Static clung to the skin. Even his hair seemed to lift slightly, as though responding to an invisible charge. There, nestled between two limestone cliffs, he found it. Not a building. Not a ruin. A field. 1 hectare wide. Lush with low grass. And in its center, burned into the soil, a shape. The spiral. Perfect. Not trampled. Not dug. Etched. And it hadn't been there in the satellite images taken just 6 days prior. Haroon knelt beside it and pressed his palm to the earth. The soil was warm. Vibrating faintly. The pattern itself seemed to shimmer if looked at too long, like the air above a road on a scorching day. He stood and turned on a portable recorder. A site located. Spiral formation present. No signs of entry or tool disturbance. Heat signature still active. A flock of birds overhead suddenly scattered. Not in chaos, but in unison, as if repelled by something they felt before it could be seen. Then the recorder cut out. No sound. No static. Just silence. He checked the device. It was still on. Fully charged. But it refused to capture sound. He spoke again. Still nothing. Haroon stood in the middle of the spiral and looked skyward. The clouds were motionless. Not drifting. Stuck. He blinked and suddenly felt a presence. Not around him. Not behind. Inside. The same pulsing sensation he remembered from the ship returned. But stronger. Sharper. As if his thoughts were being scanned, catalogued, measured against a template. He staggered backward out of the spiral's edge and the sky moved again. The wind returned. The birds began to sing. Time restarted. He didn't speak of it publicly. But he took a soil sample. Sent it to a trusted lab under a false name. The results arrived 3 days later. The sample contained trace elements of isotopes rarely found outside impact craters. Metallic traces that did not match local geology. Worse still, the molecular structure of the soil was compressed, not by weight or force, but by frequency. Altered at a subatomic level. As though reality had been folded briefly, then pressed flat again. Haroon returned to the university. But something had changed in him. He began seeing the spiral in everyday places. In foam. In puddles. In reflections. His dreams were no longer silent. He heard Myra's voice again. Whispering. Get spreading. And he wasn't the only one. Across Indonesia, reports began surfacing quietly. In scattered villages. On forgotten shorelines. Witnesses claimed to have seen shapes in the fog. Lights beneath flooded rice fields. Voices over broken radios that repeated one phrase. Return to the gate. But no one knew where the gate was. No one except a fisherman in Sumnep. Old. Half mad. Living alone by the water. When asked if he had ever seen the spiral, he laughed softly. They are not coming, he said. They have been here longer than us. The spiral doesn't mean arrival. He leaned in close, breath thick with salt. It means release. Dr. Salim Haroon could no longer ignore it. The spiral had become more than a symbol. It was a language, a signal, and now he feared a mechanism. And if that were true, someone had to have noticed it long before him. He began digging not through the earth, but through records. Old maritime charts, colonial documents, obsolete weather logs. Anything that might point to a pattern older than satellites could track. It was during this quiet obsession that he found the Red Archive. Not by name. Not in any public library. It came to him through a retired intelligence officer, an aging man who had once worked on maritime surveillance during the Cold War. Over bitter coffee, the man slid a black envelope across the table. Don't ask where it came from. Just know this, if you open it, you'll never unsee it. Inside was a reel of microfilm. Faded. Cracked. Haroon found an old reader in the university basement. As he advanced the reel, frames flashed like ghosts across the lens. Photographs of sonar anomalies, handwritten field reports, and one recurring term, written in red ink across multiple documents: Specimen Theta 3. The designation repeated in every decade: 1959, 1978, 1986, 1999. Always tied to unexplained electromagnetic events in the Masalembo region. But the most disturbing document was dated 1927, before satellites, before sonar, before Indonesia was even a nation. It was a Dutch naval log from the vessel HNLMS Hertog Hendrik. The report detailed the disappearance of a patrol boat near Pulau Tengah under extremely calm conditions. The log stated, "A water stood still. Compass turned in place. Crew reported auditory hallucinations and vertigo. Captain ordered retreat. Last message before silence, we are not alone below." The document was stamped restricted and marked for immediate transfer to Batavia Intelligence Command. On the final frame of the reel was a single image. A hand-drawn rendering. A spiral made of letters. But they were not Latin. Not Javanese. Not known. Each symbol curved into the next. Impossible to trace where it started. No beginning. No end. Just motion. Haroon copied everything. By the time he returned home, he found an envelope taped to his apartment door. No stamp. No signature. Just one word. Stop. Inside was a printed still image from the Kasatmata drone's final transmission, the same tunnel, the same figure. But now the figure had moved. Closer. Facing the camera directly. And its head was tilted, not in curiosity. In recognition. The following morning, Haroon received a call from an India. She had been tracking anomalous seismic vibrations recorded across Java and Sulawesi, minor tremors, never exceeding 1.8 on the Richter scale. Too weak to be natural tectonic shifts? But each of them followed the same harmonic pattern. Each one echoed the frequency of Myra's recorded hum. "What are we looking at?" she asked. Haroon hesitated, then answered what he already knew. "The gate is waking up." That night, across 6 coastal towns, strange events were reported. All within a span of 20 minutes. Lights seen over the sea. Electronic blackouts. Animal migrations away from the shore. Old radios broadcasting voices in languages not spoken by any living people. And one child, sleepwalking in Pasuruan, was found standing in the middle of a dry rice field, whispering again and again, "The vessel will rise." The authorities dismissed the reports as coastal hysteria. But Haroon no longer believed in coincidence. Because something beneath Pulau Tengah was no longer dormant. It had waited long enough. 3 days after the child's midnight whisper in Pasuruan, it happened. At precisely 3:33 a.m., an unregistered seismic pulse radiated from beneath Central Island. It was not an earthquake. No tectonic movement was recorded. No pressure shift beneath the mantle. And yet, every sensor station from Madura to Sulawesi lit up with alarm. The pulse did not travel along fault lines. It traveled straight up, and then into the sky. For 23 seconds, satellites above Indonesia malfunctioned. Communications dropped. GPS signals distorted. Commercial aircraft lost navigation alignment. But the event was too brief to trigger official panic. Only those who were watching closely understood. This was not a system failure. It was a broadcast. Dr. Salim Haroon watched the data stream live. He had been monitoring for weeks, sleeping barely 2 hours a night, eating only when an India forced him to. When the spike hit, he didn't blink. He simply whispered, "It's begun." The pulse left more than static. Somewhere in the frequency wash, a signal was embedded, encrypted, layered with harmonics outside human perception. But Haroon had spent enough time with Myra's recordings to know how to extract it. He ran the pulse through the same spectral decomposition software. The waveform resolved into a shape. Not a spiral this time. A circle of spirals. 12 of them. Orbiting an empty center. When he overlaid the pattern on a regional map, his blood ran cold. Each spiral aligned with a historical event, mystery disappearances, unexplained fires, aerial anomalies, and recorded magnetic surges. And all 12 points formed a perfect ring around Pulau Tengah. The 13th, the center, remained untouched. Until now. Aninja called him in the middle of decoding the waveform. Her voice was unsteady. "You need to hear this," she said. She forwarded a raw audio file captured by a weather drone flying over the Flores Sea. It had picked up interference during the 3.33 window. The file began with a familiar low-frequency hum. But then, over it, a voice emerged. Not human. Not artificial. But intelligible. Sequence complete. Synchronization achieved. Awaiting clearance. Harun nearly dropped the phone. A clearance from whom? He muttered aloud. But in his gut, he already knew the answer. Not us. Later that evening, he reviewed security camera footage from a monitoring station near the coast. He had requested the feeds quietly. Most showed nothing but fog and darkness. Except for one. At 3:35 a.m., a camera facing the sea glitched. The frame froze. Then blurred. Then returned to clarity. In that single second of distortion, the sea was no longer empty. A shape stood above the water. Massive. Towering. Geometrically perfect. As if a monolith had briefly phased into visibility, then back into non-existence. A shadow with no surface. A vessel. Not rising from the sea, but arriving through it. Harun sent the image to Aninja. She didn't respond for an hour. When she did, her reply was only 3 words. "Gid is here." At dawn, several villagers near Sumnep reported a sound beneath their homes. A vibration, like a distant engine turning beneath the earth. One described it with a phrase that would later be dismissed as folklore. The ground was breathing. In Jakarta, a quiet alert was sent to a classified division within the Ministry of Maritime Affairs. The alert included seismic data, corrupted satellite reports, and a copy of Harun's decrypted spiral map. The message was marked Priority Red and flagged with one question. Is this related to Theta 3? No reply was sent. Not because they didn't know, but because they did. Pulau Tengah had always been an afterthought. Uninhabited. Unclaimed. Unmapped in detail. Just another speck in the Masalembo Triangle, swallowed by decades of myth and disinterest. Until now. Satellite imagery taken just hours after the 3.33 event revealed something impossible. A new landform had emerged. Not an island. Not a reef. A structure. Geometric. Hexagonal. Rising just above the waves like the tip of a buried monument. As if something beneath the seabed had shifted, pushing the surface upward by design, not by force. Dr. Salim Harun stood at the shoreline in East Java, looking toward the horizon where the structure had surfaced. His hands were shaking. He was no longer alone in his belief. The university had received anonymous warnings. 3 international agencies had made private contact, asking for his full research in exchange for protective custody. They offered relocation, silence, safety. He refused them all. This was no longer about research. It was about knowing what had been waiting to be found. He and Aninja organized a return to Pulau Tengah. But this time they brought no students. No drones. No instruments beyond a single, powerful low-frequency transmitter, tuned to Myra's recorded hum. And one more thing. A book. Handwritten by Mira before her coma, preserved by Harun, and now bound in cloth. Inside were diagrams. Dreams. Warnings. And one phrase repeated over and over. The 13th gate opens inward. As they approached the site aboard a civilian vessel, the ocean grew unnaturally still. No waves. No wind. No birds. The structure ahead was fully exposed now, almost 30 meters wide, formed of black stone, so smooth it reflected the sky like a mirror. It was not natural. Not human. And not dormant. Engraved across its surface was a ring of spirals, 12 in total. And in the center, a depression. Circular. Empty. Waiting. Haroon and India brought the transmitter to the edge of the structure. When activated, the hum spilled out across the open sea. Low. Deep. Measured. At first, nothing happened. Then a resonance. The depression in the center began to glow faint, white, as if lit from beneath. The stone warmed. Then vibrated. India stepped back, eyes wide. "It's sinking with us." Haroon's voice was tight. "No. Not with us. With the signal." Suddenly, the spirals around the ring began to turn. Not physically, but optically. The lines shimmered, twisting in place without movement. And then the gate opened. There was no noise. No explosion. Just displacement. A space folded inward, forming a well of infinite black, so dark it devoured the sunlight around it. And from that void came a wind. Not cold. Not hot. Just ancient. Haroon felt it press against his skin, not from the outside, but from within his bones. He stumbled to his knees. The transmitter fell silent. The wind stopped. And from within the gate, something looked back. No form. No body. Just a pressure. A presence. Like a thought with no voice. And then a sound. "You were not the first to open us." Haroon gasped. India's eyes glazed over. She whispered, "It remembers." The gate pulsed once. A shockwave of soft light swept across the water. Not outward. Inward. Absorbing everything. They fled. Back to the boat. Back to the sea. Behind them, the gate sealed. The spiral stopped. The glow died. The ocean resumed its surface stillness. As if nothing had happened. As if nothing had ever been there. But Haroon knew better. Because the pulse hadn't stopped with the sea. Back in Surabaya, screens flickered in banks, hospitals, and airports. People across Java reported hearing a low hum from their phones, even when turned off. And across the globe, in forgotten vaults and silent monitoring rooms, old red files marked Theta 3 were pulled from shelves. Unsealed. Dusted off. And reopened. 3 days after the 13th gate closed, Indonesia's skies changed. It began subtly. Cloud patterns shifted into unnatural symmetry, spirals forming, dispersing, then forming again. Unconnected air traffic routes began experiencing identical magnetic interference. Flocks of birds across the Makassar Strait flew in circular paths before collapsing mid-flight. But the most unnerving sign came not from the skies or the sea. It came from the minds of those who had heard the hum. India was the first to feel it. She woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her mouth full of seawater she had never touched. Her voice shook as she described her dream, a black corridor lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected her, but the reflections were thinking, not mimicking. "They were remembering things I haven't done yet," she whispered. Dr. Haroon recorded every word. And she wasn't alone. Survivors of past incidents, crew members from Siner Lot, the technician who decoded Myra's files, even Pak Ralph, the old lighthouse keeper, all began reporting similar symptoms. They didn't remember the night of the spiral. They relived it. Again and again. Each memory sharper than the last. Each vision slightly changed. As if the spiral was editing their perception. Or rewriting it. Haroon reviewed Myra's book again. One page, long ignored, suddenly made sense. The spiral is not a door. It is a mechanism for memory. It does not move through space. It moves through minds. It explained everything. The shared dreams. The whispers. The signal that Mira could hum while unconscious. The hallucinations that followed the drone's disappearance. The structure rising not with force, but intent. The spiral was not a message. It was a form of consciousness distribution. A living archive embedded in electromagnetic frequencies, designed to imprint itself onto intelligent minds. And now it was active. The 13th gate had not summoned something. It had reactivated what was already here. Haroon traced reports as far back as 1901, before the Dutch naval encounters. Folktales. Warnings. In one old Sulawesi manuscript, a fisherman wrote of the Sur Tak Bertubu, a voice without a body, that lured men into the sea by repeating their own thoughts back to them. But it was a translated side note that chilled Haroon the most. The spiral speaks only when the sky is ready to remember. Meanwhile, strange behaviors were spreading. In Jakarta, a man wandered into a police station speaking in spirals, his sentences looped back on themselves, structured like recursive code. In Makassar, children were caught drawing glyphs identical to the ones on Myra's walls, despite never having seen them. Hospitals began to fill. Not with the wounded. With the silent. Across Sulawesi, Java, and parts of Kalimantan, patients began arriving with the same symptoms: no physical trauma, no fever, no neural infection. Just stillness. Eyes open. Mouths closed. Breathing shallow. Their EEG scans showed heightened activity in regions of the brain associated with pattern recognition, memory, and deep language processing, as though each of them were hearing something, seeing something, and translating it in silence. Doctors called it a neurological anomaly. Haroon knew better. The spiral was uploading. One patient in Yogyakarta, a 10-year-old boy named Febri, began scribbling compulsively on hospital sheets. Dozens of circles, symbols, and strange configurations emerged. The doctors dismissed it as random output. But when Haroon was shown a sample, he stopped breathing for a full 5 seconds. It matched the layout of the subsea structure beneath Pulau Tengah. Perfectly. Down to the chamber formation, the corridor angles, and even the hatch that had opened for Kasatmata. Febri had never been on a ship. Never left Java. Haroon visited him the next morning. The boy stared blankly ahead. But when Haroon approached and whispered, "Do you hear it?" Febri turned his head slightly. And smiled. Then, in a voice not entirely his own, he said, "Memory is safer in children." That same week, Aninja's home was broken into. Nothing was stolen. Nothing destroyed. But all copies of Myra's notebook, digital, paper, or otherwise, were missing. A single note was left behind on her kitchen table. Handwritten. Containment protocol expired. Theta 3 has resumed self-distribution. By now, Haroon could no longer access several of his university's databases. Files had been removed. His credentials silently revoked. He received no notice. No warning. But he did receive a package. No sender. Just a burned, metallic shard roughly the size of a child's hand. He recognized it instantly. Kasatmata. The drone. Gone for weeks. Now returned in pieces. The shard was etched with lines spirals upon spirals. Not ornamental. Not random. A script. One that Mira had begun translating long ago. Haroon placed the shard beneath a microscope. Inside the etching was a second spiral. And inside that a coordinate. Not on Earth. Not yet. That night, across 3 continents, radar stations picked up the same anomaly. A faint object in low orbit. No heat signature. No engine trail. It did not fall. It simply appeared. Hovering for 6 minutes above the Indian Ocean. And then gone. The governments watching it could not agree on what it was. But to Haroon, the answer was obvious. A receiver. The spiral was not just rewriting minds. It was reaching home. In the quiet hours before sunrise, a final dream came to Aninja. She stood on a shoreline of impossible geometry. The ocean in front of her pulsed like lungs. And in the distance, rising from the horizon, a shape moved forward. Not a ship. Not a creature. A structure walking across the sea. At its center, a child's voice echoed outward, repeating again and again. "When memory is full, the vessel will return." She woke, gasping for air. The floor beneath her was warm. Not from sunlight, but from something moving beneath it. Aninja did not leave her apartment for 2 days. She could feel it beneath her, something humming through the concrete, resonating inside the metal joints of the building. Her clock slowed. Water in her glass trembled without cause. When she touched her phone, it turned itself off. She kept hearing the voice of the child from her dream. When memory is full, the vessel will return. It wasn't just metaphor anymore. It was an instruction. At the same time, Haroon, now in hiding, moving between borrowed houses and abandoned labs, received an encrypted call. A voice he hadn't heard in years. Mira. No video. No identification. Just her voice. Calm. Clean. No trace of fear. Hello, Haroon, she said. Mira? Where are you? I'm not where I was, she replied. And I'm not only me anymore. Silence. Then she added, the vessel is no longer metal. It has chosen biology. It's using us now. He gripped the edge of the table. Chosen? For what? Her voice changed then. Sharpened. Cold. To carry it forward. The line cut. Haroon stared at the phone in disbelief. Mira had been missing for months. Declared deceased. But her voice was real. And it was no longer hers alone. Around the same time, strange medical reports began leaking from hospitals near Gresik and Makassar. Entire families admitted with identical symptoms, lucid dreams, emotional detachment, and spontaneous knowledge of ancient symbols none of them had ever studied. Children began speaking in recursive patterns, words looping in on themselves. One boy recited a spiral equation backwards and forwards in perfect sync, as if playing both versions of a sound at once. One girl drew a shape over and over in the air with her finger. The spiral. Not as a memory. As a muscle reflex. Anindya left her apartment in the middle of the night and took a train toward East Java. She didn't tell Haroon. She didn't bring a phone. But she brought Myra's notebook, what remained of it, and the metallic shard from Kasatmata. In her mind was a single thought, the gate may have closed, but it never locked. And if the spiral was shifting into biology, it was no longer waiting for the sea. The vessel was now everywhere. Inside memory. Inside people. Inside her. Meanwhile, Haroon decrypted the remaining audio files Mira had left behind. He focused on one that had eluded him for weeks, a low tone embedded beneath her original hum. A frequency humans weren't supposed to detect. But machines could. He amplified it. And the shape emerged. Not a spiral. A neural map. A replica of the human brain. Overlaid with spirals at precise locations, memory, language, fear, and time perception. The spiral hadn't been just a pattern. It was a design. A program evolving through biology. Using memory as data. Using thought as architecture. The final line in Myra's note confirmed it. We are no longer observers. We are now the carriers. That night, the stars over Central Island disappeared. Not behind clouds. Behind a shadow. A massive silhouette hovered without motion. Not flying. Not floating. Stationary. Like a reflection of something underground. Something mirrored into the sky. Coastal power grids flickered. Earthquake sensors triggered. But no one saw the object with their eyes. Only with their dreams. And those who dreamed of it woke changed. Quiet. Focused. Remembering things they had never lived. As dawn broke over the Makassar Strait, people who had dreamed of the object above Central Island began to speak a new phrase. Not one they heard. But one they woke knowing. The convergence is not arrival. It is alignment. In Surabaya, in Makassar, in Jakarta, across scattered islands and even inland villages, hundreds of individuals, men, women, children, began sketching the same diagram without explanation. 12 spirals circling a void. Each drawing differed in hand, but not in shape. They were identical in proportion. It was spreading. The spiral had passed the barrier of silence. It was now memory. Memory as infection. Memory as replication. A viral pattern that jumped not by contact, but by recognition. If you understood it, you carried it. And Haroon finally realized what Mira had become. Not a messenger. Not a survivor. A transmitter. He boarded a train bound for Banyuwangi, traveling alone, wrapped in layers of notes, coordinates, and recordings. He didn't know where Mira was, but he knew who could find her. The one still dreaming. He made contact with a young girl named Tisha, recently hospitalized after sleepwalking into the ocean and returning without a drop of water on her. She spoke softly, eyes clouded, and asked him only one question. "Do you still see the black water?" Harun nodded. Tisha reached into her pocket and handed him a slip of paper. A location. It wasn't Pulau Tengah. It wasn't even the sea. It was a mountain in East Java. Gunung Ijen. An ancient crater. Long dormant. Famous for its glowing blue flames caused by ignited sulfuric gas. But Tisha said the fire wasn't sulfur anymore. "It's calling now," she whispered. From underneath. An Indio arrived 2 days earlier, hiking alone to the edge of the crater, carrying the spiral shard and Myra's fragmented notebook. The deeper she climbed, the quieter her mind became. At the summit, she looked down into the blue fire below. It shimmered like breath. The wind carried a new sound, not a hum, not a tone. A whisper. Thousands of voices speaking in perfect synchrony. Not loud. Just present. She sat at the rim and opened the notebook to the last unmarked page. And there, written in her own handwriting though she had no memory of writing it, were the words. "It is not what came from the sea. It is what woke in us because of it." At that same moment, beneath Jakarta's National Library, a storage vault sealed since the 1970s flickered to life. Inside, a dormant surveillance system began replaying an old film reel on repeat. It showed footage from a 1959 naval expedition, one long classified under Theta 3. In the final seconds, the film captured the open sea at night. And in the distance, a dark shape rose above the water. Not a vessel. Not an island. A face. Not human. Not monstrous. Just geometrically wrong. And familiar. The same proportions as the spirals. The same configuration as Myra's neural diagrams. A face made of memory. And then, on the final frame, a word was scratched into the reel by hand. Remember. Everywhere, the signals converged. In streetlights blinking at fixed intervals. In dreams. In words half-spoken. In spirals drawn without thought. The gate had never been about passage. It had been a mirror. Showing us the shape of what we could never understand until now. It happened just after midnight. The world didn't end. It shifted. Subtly. Quietly. Without warning. A global ripple, a neurological pulse not measured by seismographs or satellites, but by something far older. Consciousness itself? In Surabaya, Harun felt it before he heard it. A vibration inside his skull. Not pain. Not pressure. Recognition. He was in a hotel room, surrounded by decades of classified data and field notes. Every page turned inward. Every diagram spiraled into the same shape. Then came a knock at the door. He opened it. Mira stood there. Alive. But not entirely herself. Her eyes held a depth that pulled the breath from his chest. Behind her irises something turned slowly like a wheel. "You're part of it now," she said gently. "We both are." Harun staggered back. "What is it?" Mira smiled. "Not what. When." Across the ocean, in the crater of Gunung Ijen, an India stood on the rim as the flames below shifted color. From blue to violet. From violet to white. Then black. The fire was no longer fire. It was a signal. And the crater itself a forgotten receiver. The spiral had not chosen random minds. It had chosen patterns. People with broken timelines. Repeating thoughts. Recursive behaviors. Neurodivergent systems that mirrored the spiral's own shape. The human brain was the perfect host. Not because it was the most intelligent, but because it could be taught to dream in loops. That morning, digital clocks across the Indonesian archipelago lost exactly 1 hour. Not forward. Not backward. Gone. Radio signals collapsed for 60 seconds across all known frequencies, replaced by one sound, Myra's voice, layered with thousands of others. She spoke only once. The alignment is complete. Memory has returned. And then silence. The world moved on. Planes resumed flight. Cities woke. Children went to school. But everything was just slightly off. Unnoticeable to most. But to those who had dreamed of the spiral, the wind felt unfamiliar. Mirrors reflected things at the edge. Clocks ticked, but only when observed. And in their minds, beneath every surface thought, a presence listened. Not hostile. Not divine. Just aware. Dr. Salim Haroun no longer lectured. No more expeditions. He lived quietly somewhere near Baluran, writing notes that never made it to paper. Notebooks filled themselves. Pencils dulled and broke without use. His final entry read, "We were not visited. We were not invaded. We were remembered." Because the spiral is not the arrival of something new. It is the return of what we were always meant to become. Beneath Pulau Tengah, the seabed remains still. But if you stand on the southern coast at night and watch the tide long enough, sometimes the waves don't come in patterns. Sometimes they move in spirals. And sometimes, just before dawn, you may feel it. The shape beneath the world. Turning. Waiting. Remembering you back.